All right. I want to seize this opportunity, first of all, to thank all of you the call for coming to listen to this seminar series. I know most of you would be wondering, the Tuskegee University seminar series started first of all as a departmental seminar series, then was embraced by the College of Arts and Sciences and morphed to a university-wide seminar series. And in this series, we bring our faculty, other public intellectuals to inform us of their writing, of their research, of their activities. They tell us some of the things we need to hear and we need to know. So today we have the privilege of having Dr. Garrett Ash, and Dr. Garrett Ash will be speaking to us about writing. I would certainly have to leave that introduction to be done by our own junior, Miss Fallon Brannan, who is a junior in English and a script writer. She is an up and coming, one of the stars that our department is going to produce. So I would leave Ms. Brannan. I give you the opportunity, introduce us to who Dr. Garrett Ashley is, and then what he will be telling us, and likely let's just have an idea of who he is. So you have the floor.
Yes. So Dr. Garrett Ashley received his PhD from the University of Southern Mississippi in May 2020. He joined Tuskegee University's Department of Modern Languages, Communication, and Philosophy as assistant professor of English and creative writing in the fall of 2021. Dr. Ashley grew up in an hour's drive south of Jackson, Mississippi, among beglars, cattle, and crawfish boils. His experience in the South led to an interest in gritty Southern literature, though he has admittedly never tried to or felt the pull to write within the genre of the rough South or grit lit. His PhD dissertation focused on the rough South, which encompasses writers like Larry Brown, Harry Crews, and Flannery O'Connor. Additional research interests include absences and abundances in literature and architecture. He is also interested in modeling and miniatures and the ways scaling and distortions influence the language of the sublime. As a freshman at a small junior college in Mississippi, Dr. Ashley knew that he was interested in telling stories, but he did not know anything about the difficulties of being a writer. While he made the decision to major in English, he dedicated himself to writing as if it were no longer just a hobby. In 2009, he submitted his first short story to a small publication in Indiana. He subsequently received his first rejection. Since then, he has appeared in over 50 publications. Dr. Garrett Ashley's short fiction has appeared recently in The Normal School, Read Magazine, Moon City Review, Sonora Review, DLAGRAM, Isimo's Science Fiction, and Red Rock Review. And he has more work forthcoming at Sequestrum in the Swamp. His short fiction collection, My Grandfather Ran Off to the Woods, has become a finalist at both Steel Toe Books and the Journal's Nonfiction/Fiction Collection Prize. He has been anthologized in the eNow Awards, Lake Forest College Press, and has been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes. His genre fiction has been cited twice in Ellen DeToe's Best Horror of the Year and in SF Signal's Best of the Year 2013. He currently has 2 short story collections, a novel, and a novella on submission. In addition to the above publications and awards, He has also served as fiction editor for 3 literary magazines: the Mississippi Review, Product Magazine, and The Intentional. He has presented work for the English Honor Society, Sigma Tau Theta, the Mississippi Philological Association, and the 5 at 5 reading series for the University of Alabama's College of Arts and Sciences. At the beginning of the pandemic, he was part of the writing residency at Twisted Run Retreat, where he focused on a short manuscript and read to a virtual audience. His current manuscript length fiction project takes place in the South and deals with climate change and systemic environmental degradation. In addition to his pursuits in fiction, he is currently engaged on the ethical implications of writing from the perspective of others, whether it should be done, whether it can be done, or should be avoided, and how other writers, particularly authors from the South, have accomplished this. I invite you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Ashley with a big round of TU applause.
You could use the clap symbol right there. Thank you. So Dr. Ashley, before you start, let me just draw attention to the audience. If you have questions, either drop them in the chat or at the end, you will be given the opportunity to ask questions. So Dr. Ashley, you have the floor.
Absolutely, thank you so much. My plan for this is to give a lot of information that would normally be stretched over several lectures. And I'm doing this because this is all, to me, in undergrad, the past version of myself. This is all stuff that I wish that someone would have told me earlier on so that I could have had a sort of head start with my journey of being a writer. So I'm going to go over a lot of stuff here, and I absolutely invite questions. I'm going to try to end at about the 35-40 minute mark here. So I'm going to try to double check the time as I'm moving along to give you guys a little bit more time to ask questions and to respond and that sort of stuff. In my experience of talking about publishing, I tend to see a pretty diverse set of questions, and I can get pretty chatty. So I just want to leave enough room for that here towards the end. And I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. I'm going to, I discovered too before we started here that I cannot control select links when we're in this full screen mode. So I'm going to kind of be back and forth between full screen and the editing mode of that. So if things get a little bit too small for you to see, please leave something in the chat and I'll try to pay attention to that. So I wanted to talk today about submitting work to particularly small literary magazines. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of the New Yorker. Maybe you've heard of the Paris Review. Maybe you've heard of McSweeney's. These are all very popular sort of mass market literary magazines. A lot of people can get a hold of these things at places like Books A Million, bookstores in general, and that sort of thing. I'm even going to talk a little bit about genre magazines today, not to the extent that I'm just going to talk about the general experience of submitting your work and what some of these things are. I'm going to focus on your online presence too, which is something I want to point out here at the beginning. If this were an in-person meeting, I would have a ton of things to kind of pass around to everyone in the audience just to show you what these things look and feel like. But this virtual environment gives me the opportunity to focus on something that I feel is a bit more accessible to audiences that are unfamiliar with this kind of stuff anyway, which is the online literary magazine. So that will be our primary focus for the discussion today. And in addition to just talking about what literary magazines are, I want to give you a breakdown of the process of submissions and just being a writer in general. I'll devote about 10 minutes to discussing where to submit and how to find places to submit to. And I don't want to use the word submit lightly here. When I talk about submissions, I mean reading too. These are places that you would find, put on your shelf and read later. This is all, great resources for people who are interested in potentially writing. So I don't submit to any journals without reading them and being familiar with them. So I just want to get that out of the way first. And then I'm going to talk about how to submit, what that looks like, what cover letters look like, and that will transition into the why of the situation. Why should we be doing this as creative people? And I'll kind of start there too, the whole why of the subject. When I was an undergrad, I think that, Fallon mentioned this in my introduction, and thank you so much for doing that, Fallon. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. All of this was very unfamiliar to me. I knew that I wanted to write. I enjoyed doing it kind of as a hobby. I didn't tell people about it. It was something that was kind of secretive to me. I come from a place where if you do something like, if you're a writer, you might kind of be looked at funny because people were very hard-edged in my hometown, not necessarily in a bad way, but it was certainly a cultural thing. Literary magazines, I knew nothing about them. To be honest, I was barely even a reader when I was young. I didn't really start reading books until after I graduated high school, and I was a late bloomer. Just from a cultural perspective, I think that it happened naturally though. So when I get to college, I start writing a lot, but I'm not reading anything. So naturally, I'm failing as a writer because I don't really have any work to learn from. And that's why I think it's important to rely on something like a literary magazine. What is a literary magazine? Pictured on the left is the Mississippi Review, and let me move this over. I'm actually going to change my screen share to the whole thing so that I can kind of point out a few things with my mouse here. The image on the left is the Mississippi Review. The one on the right is the Intentional Quarterly, a DC magazine I worked for as a fiction editor. What these things are small magazines devoted to publishing stuff like fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and sometimes art. I have a few of them here with me. This is Plowshares. This is something that I subscribe to. These magazines have very small audiences. Plowshares is one of the most popular journals. I think that they might have, as of a few years ago, the editor told a class that I was in, they came in and visited, they asked us to try to determine how many subscribers they have. And it ended up being 500 or 600. So the circulation on these things are very small, but literary magazines are really meant to be places where like-minded individuals can submit their work and read the work of other like-minded individuals. This is important for you as a writer. If you're just thinking about getting into this kind of stuff, okay? You need to be reading other people. And these are the natural places to start. Now, these are print magazines. Mississippi Review used to have an online component. In fact, Mississippi Review Online was the first online literary magazine, which was started by an old mentor of mine many, many years ago. I am going to show you guys just for a little bit here a couple of my favorite literary magazines, and I'll probably focus on their submissions guidelines too here in a little bit. But we're going to start with Smoke Lawn Quarterly. But these are both places that I have had work in, and this is what I mean by I'm going to have to exit out here in order to get them to work. Let's see. This is Smoke Lawn Quarterly. And say if you you bookmark one of these pages on your computer, you'll have like just endless stuff to read. All of this is free, by the way. So if you find a magazine that you like and you want to be in it, read it. There's no excuse not to. I pulled up just a random fiction piece. This is from their weekly stories section here. I believe they also have kind of like an issue type subscription service where you get the work in your email once a week or something like that. I can't remember. They've changed up how they do it, but Smoke Along Quarterly publishes flash fiction, and what that is fiction that comes under 1,000 words. These are very quick reads too, which is another thing that's really great about this particular magazine. And I'm also going to look at Diagram here. This is another place that I really, really like, and it's a lot simpler. And I just wanted to show you guys kind of the difference between one place and another. This magazine really focuses on real and minimalism, and it's a really strange little journal that I've always kind of been attracted to. They publish something called a section or a genre called schematics, where they tend to have a bit of art here, and I've vetted some of these to make sure that there's nothing rated R here, since it is an art journal. They kind of do whatever they want in order to express themselves. So here we have kind of an illustration along with a poem. And I think here was another poem I looked at earlier that I thought was really interesting and strange, because it's written in a way where you can read it either left to right, or you can read one column at a time. Fascinating stuff. Let's get back to this slide here. I keep magazines by my shelf in order to help myself to feel inspired enough to write. And that was something else I was going to focus on a little bit towards the end here, like what inspires us as writers. Reading other people's work isn't just going to show us what is possible to submit to these places, but it just helps, in my opinion and in my experience, to kind of refuel those creative energies that we need in order to keep ourselves moving as writers. This is actually my bookshelf. It's next to my desk in my office. I have a Southern Humanities Review here kind of on display. This is the last book I looked at. I change my display out kind of often. I switch my books around. Whenever I'm feeling a bit low on energy, I reach down and I grab one of the tin houses, or I grab one of the plowshares off the shelf and just look at these things. And I have a variety of different magazines on my shelf here. Some of these are university-run literary magazines, like the Southern Humanities Review. This is out of Auburn University. Next semester, I plan on actually incorporating one for our students here. So we're going to work on that too at Tuskegee University, and I'm very excited about that. So you've got university journals, and you also have private journals like Tin House. This magazine is unfortunately no longer with us, and I don't remember the reason why they closed down. It's been quite a while here, but I have the last issue on my shelf, and it's very sad to look at. But as you can see, I was sort of a collector of that particular magazine. They publish new writers, fancy established writers that we are all familiar with. It's just an amalgamation of people. And this is why I feel literary magazines are so important. They're taking people who are already established and mixing them in with new voices. Okay, and that's going to be important here. If you're a new voice, if you've never submitted to a journal before, if you're unaware that this was even an option for you, I want you to really start thinking about injecting yourself into the conversation of fiction, poetry, and nonfiction here, and sending your work out. So now, getting a little bit ahead of myself. Now that we have talked a little bit about what these things are, I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, which is how to submit. Where do I find a place to actually send my work to? I've harped on this idea of reading and being an active reader and engaging with the community of writers. But if I'm new to this, I'm not going to know what I'm doing. I'm not going to know where to start. I have here a few sample resources that I use quite frequently. Hard Feather Review is my favorite, and I'm going to show you guys some of what this stuff looks like. I'm not going to focus on Duotrope as much because this is a subscription service. I think it's like maybe $5 a month. I would say that's worth it if you are doing this quite often. They show things like rejection data, like, you know, they reject 97% of things that are sent to them. This journal does this journal accepts online submissions, etc. I'm just going to focus on the simpler stuff here. And I'll break this down into literary submissions versus genre submissions, just in case some of you are interested in writing like horror, science fiction, fantasy, and that kind of thing. So first, let's look at Hard Feather Review's Where to Submit page. This is such a great resource, and it takes so much work to keep this up. I really appreciate the people who do this. It used to belong to a literary magazine called Entropy, and then they were like, man, we're really tired of keeping up with all this. I don't really know the full story behind why they handed it over to Heavy Feather Review. But this website breaks the submission opportunities into presses, chapbooks, and journals and anthologies. And there's also a fellowships opportunities section here too, if any of you are interested in looking into fellowship opportunities, which would be like Fallon mentioned my Twisted Run retreat thing during the bio reading. This is something that I did for a week for free. I had to apply for it, send in my work, and I got to just go and hang out by the river for a week and write work and then read my work to an audience. It's a great opportunity. And that's not just for creative writing majors either. That's for anyone who wants to go and work on their stuff. So let's focus on journals and anthologies here. Presses would be, say, if you have a book, either a novel or short stories or a poetry collection or something like that. That I would say is a little bit more advanced. I would do that kind of stuff after you've been submitting to journals for a little while. We just have a list of places to submit to, what they want, and whether you have to pay for it. I always tell new writers, don't pay for submissions. Look for places that are free first. Most places charge $3 to start. That is really just to cover the cost of the submission engine, which I'll show you guys here in just a little bit. But look around at some of these places and just figure out what they want. Now, I will say that New Pages, which is the other place I wanted to talk about here, is going to be a bit more detailed in terms of the magazine listing. So I'm going to click on Mags here on New Pages. I'm going to go down to See Literary Magazines. And here we have some filter options. Let's say that you are interested in publishing online. I was always told that publishing in print is better than online, but I think that it's 2022. A lot of people are looking to have their work accessible to other readers, and print magazines are just in general less accessible, just objectively. So we're going to go with online for now. And let's say you are a nonfiction writer. You know, writing isn't just for English majors, it's for everyone. If you're interested in writing about you know, problems in the medical field, which is something that I'm talking to one of my students about currently, you can write about it creatively at that. So here are a list of places that you can send your work. A lot of these I'm fairly familiar with. Some of them are brand new. Bridge, I'm less familiar with. I did look at this earlier though, and it seemed like a pretty interesting place. This magazine says it is looking for Bridge is a bold initiative to establish a national literary journal for young writers ages 14 to 24. It's edited by young writers, and it's for young writers. So if you're between the ages of 14 and 24, a lot of us here at Tuskegee University are within, I would assume the 18 to 25-year-old, bracket. This might be a good place to start. So I'll click that. It brings us to the website, and here we have everything that we need on the left here. If you want to read some good fiction, nonfiction, poetry, read some, explore what's on the magazine. And that's key here, is you're going to have to dig for the stuff that you want to read and that you enjoy. You're going to have to figure out, just by the experience of digging around, what magazines are going to be right for your own work. So once we have that kind of established here, once we have a place in mind, how do we submit to these journals? Usually there's something as simple as a submission button here, and I'm not actually seeing one. I just discovered this journal today. Details for submission. Yeah, okay, here we go. Follow the directions. Click that submissions button, read what they are looking for. If they're looking for fiction that's under 3,500 words, do not send them fiction that's 4,000 words. You'll get an instant rejection then. And your first rejection won't be for the right reasons. If they're looking for something double space it. Just get the simple stuff out of the way. And also look for other stuff that is important to you. Let me go ahead and pull up the next slide here, which actually focuses a little bit on Smoke Law Quarterly's guidelines. Look for stuff that's important to you. If you want to be paid for your writing, and this is kind of like a conversation on its own, is you need to make sure that you're not just submitting to any journal. And here's the thing, it's very hard to find places that will simultaneously pay its writers and also publish new voices. A lot of places that pay are bigger, they're better established. A lot of these new journals are not going to pay its writers. And it simply becomes a matter of, and I hate the word exposure here, but that's what it is. If you kind of have to do this for the love of sharing your work with other people. Smoke Law Quarterly did not pay when I had a story there, but now they pay $50 a story, which is pretty good for, work that's under 1,000 words. What was worth it submitting to this particular magazine for me was that it was a very popular magazine. They had a huge readership. I think they had it was in the thousands per month, I believe. And that's pretty great, considering a lot of really established print magazines only have a few hundred subscribers at times. And that's the popular ones at that. So when it comes to actually following the guidelines, make sure that you actually follow them. Try not to be the exception for any particular rule. Sometimes they're just kind of like, do whatever, send us your best work, whatever that means, but also pay attention to what they are looking for. If they're not looking for science fiction, don't send them science fiction. Send your science fiction to a genre magazine, and let me go and find that. This is for those who are interested in submitting science fiction and horror and that kind of thing. There's something called the pro markets section at Rollin.com. I started using this as an undergraduate. I made my first big story sales just through this resource. And you can change this to pro, semi-pro, pay, no payment at all. Generally, the stuff that pays more is going to get more submissions, because people want to be paid for their hard work, obviously. If you get more submissions, though, you have to be a little bit harder on acceptances and rejections. And I have been rejected a lot through this resource. But if you're a science fiction writer, for instance, you might check out Asimov's science fiction. You might check out Clarkesworld magazine. I'm going to actually go to Clarkesworld here. This is another online journal. Love this place. I've never been in it. They're very tough. This is a tough market, but it's one of the best. And I think they pay, it might be up to 15 cents a word now. And if you have like a 7,000 word story, that adds up pretty well. I don't want to talk too much about getting paid because that's not why I do any of this. Why I do this obviously is because I enjoy doing it. This was before it became part of my job. It was something that I did as a hobby. And I'm thankful that it is part of my job now, but at first, if you want to be, a big writer, you have to start small. I think just like any other profession out there, you have to kind of start at the bottom and work your way to the top. I just so happen to really enjoy writing short fiction. And a lot of the manuscript submissions I have out now are just short fiction. So that makes me happy. But let's talk a little more about how to submit your work. If you want to submit to any of these places, most likely they're going to use a submittable account. And what this is just a place where you come in and you, let me move my face out of the way here. You will come in here, you'll make an account, and I think it takes just a few minutes to actually do this. I've already made an account, but to sign up, this is all you do. You give them this information, and then you really never have to come back to the submittable website again, because most places actually use this in their guidelines, like Smoke Lawn Quarterly. We have a submit now button. You'll come in, sign up with the stuff that you entered in, your email address, your home address, etc. And then you're going to come down to the bottom here and look at their submission options. Smoke Lawn actually has a feedback option that costs a little bit of money. Sometimes it, feedback ranges between $15 and $100 depending on the length of the work. Do that if you don't have any other reader friends to help you out with your work. But generally, I just kind of like to share my work with people I know before I revise it and start sending it out places. But I'm going to click submit here and show you what this looks like. Is it going to make me sign in? Yeah, it's going to make me sign in. That's fine. There we go. So they reiterate the guidelines here. All of that's pretty straightforward. And this is really great because it has like my old submission information on here already. I don't know why it does, but I keep my cover letter pretty short. I'm actually going to talk about cover letters here in just a moment. And you just attach your file, you enter in a cover letter. There's a lot more on this page than other places. It's usually fairly simple. Just submit your file and then click submit, and then you wait. And that wait is dreadful and terrible, and you will probably, I hate to say this, in your first submission, if you're like me, you're going to get a rejection letter. Okay, that happens. That's why I have over 25 to 30 submissions in queue at a time, usually split between 4 or 5 pieces of fiction or poetry. It's rough starting off, I promise, but when you try hard enough, and I'm going to get into the act of being rejected here in just a moment. If you try hard enough, it becomes kind of part of who you are. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to talk about the cover letter really quick, and then transition into the why we should be submitting thing. This is my example cover letter. This is the one that I'm using now. A lot of you are probably like, okay, they're asking for a cover letter. Who am I? I'm not really sure exactly what I'm doing here. And I'm getting a question about something that's kind of immediate here. Yes, you can, no, actually Smoke Lawn Quarterly, I don't believe they take poetry submissions. They just take flash fiction. Diagram, though, on the other hand, the one that I showed you guys earlier does take poetry. But back to this, if you have a situation come up and you have to write a cover letter, I used to really freak out about this when I first started off. I was like, I don't really have a whole lot about myself to say. If I've never been published before, if I'm just, heck, I might not even be a part of the school anymore. Maybe, you just want to write about where you live, whether this is your first publication, that's totally fine. This is one of my first cover letters. I saved it from when I started doing this maybe 15 plus years ago. Garrett Ashley lives in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. If accepted, this will be his first published story. You all live somewhere and you all have a line just like this. As I continued to do this, as I grew a little bit more confident in myself, I started to kind of add to it. So this is the one that I'm using currently. I keep it really simple. As a fiction editor, back when I was working on the Mississippi Review and the Intentional Quarterly and Product Magazine and all these places, we get submissions and people would have like their life story in there, but really it's better to keep this stuff simple. To brag on yourself, but also try to condense your identity into just 2 or 3 lines, and that's very tough. And that's why I wanted to kind of bring this up here, because I think it's a fairly good transition into why we should be submitting. It feels good writing that cover letter. It feels good getting to this point as a creative person. In general, when you're at this point, you are putting yourself into the shoes of a creative person. You are pursuing art now. That's important to our identities. But I say here, you're writing a cover letter because you've accomplished something that's important to you. Now, I don't mean to be toxically positive here, but if you have written something, you have to understand that not a whole lot of people do this. A lot of people talk about this. You hear it all the time. Man, I should write a book about blank. I really don't like hearing that, because if you want to write a book, you should write a book. You should get out a piece of paper, start writing. Don't talk about it. Just get into it. And I know that this is a thing with people who are not writers or not English majors or people who have never considered writing before, think about pursuing creative interests all the time. I remember when I kind of first started to tell people that I was a writer, like a lot of people from my high school, for instance, probably don't even know that I do this. But when people started to discover that this is who I was getting weirdly like private messages on Facebook and stuff, people asking me to, it's like, hey, I have an idea for a story and I want you to write it. I was like, what? You write it? It's yours. You should do that. You should try it yourself. Even if you screw it up, even if you're not the greatest at it right now, it's something that you should pursue if you thought about it. When you get to the cover letter, when you get to this stage in the writing process, though, these should be largely self-reflective of your identity as a writer. They reinforce, in my opinion, the positive outlook of the whole thing, especially in light of the fact that we're going to be getting rejection letters. So this is the why we should be doing it. Number one, avoid thinking about publication. And that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. It seems a bit counterintuitive. Well, I'm submitting this stuff because I want to be published. The reason that you should be submitting is because you want to share your work with other people who are like you. Okay? You shouldn't be doing this because you have intentions of becoming famous one day. Although, I hope that all of you who try this, luck up and get to that point. This is all about putting yourself out there and building confidence in yourself as a writer. And that sort of positivity can, in my opinion, in my experience, transfer to other aspects of your life as well. If you become a more confident submitter, if you have something that you worked on and you're kind of shy about it, you're kind of shy about showing people this stuff. If you can submit that work, then think of what else you can do that requires any level of confidence. And the submission should be a form of self-reflection. Think about where you've been, how far you've come as a person, and think about what you've chosen to write about. If you're writing about yourself, if you're writing a short CNF creative nonfiction piece that explores your childhood and all the trouble that you've been through and how you were able to make it through it. You know, every piece that we write should have a bit of ourselves in it. So sending that out into the world is like saying, hey, this is me. This is what I've done. This is what I've created. And this is what we can do as people. And lastly here, every submission should be followed by more creative endeavors. Every piece that you work on should be the next step in your evolution as a writer. One thing that I've always had trouble with, and this is coming from someone who's been through a writing program and you know I've experienced this with people in writing programs, is you'll work on one story and then you just cannot let it go. You just cannot let that work go. You keep revising it, you keep submitting it. Eventually you build up 30 rejections and no one wants it. No one wants your work. I don't know why. But then you don't let it go. Everything that you work on should be a building block for the next thing that you work on. If one story fails, reassess. What did you do wrong here? What can I do in the next one that's better? That's one of the hardest things about being a writer, is kind of throwing out old ideas that didn't make it. Okay, some of them are not going to make it. I can attest to this. I was going to show my submittable portal, and I think that I should here just for a moment, just to give you an idea what this is going to be like. I'm going to go ahead and click all submissions, and I want you to see how many times I have been rejected just on this portal. 608 times. That's a lot of stuff to kind of throw out the window. But you're not throwing anything out the window. You are building yourself as a person by doing this. If you are a creative person at all, this is why I think that you should consider pursuing publication in a way. So that's just my 2 cents on that. This isn't intended to scare anyone. I think that you all are kind of familiar with rejection now. I mean, you all had to apply to jobs. You've had to apply to, university. It probably felt wonderful, by the way, getting accepted to school, getting that first job acceptance or whatever, your experience is. It's really the same with this. And it really shouldn't be scary because you've all been through this before. It's just another way to build yourself as a person and a creative individual. So with that being said, I want to come back to the beginning here. What is a literary magazine and who are they for? They're for anyone who wants to read. That sounds pretty basic, right? Literary magazines are not just for English majors, okay? And the reason why I wanted to do this presentation in general was to bring awareness to A, their existence, and B, the possibility of sending your work out and sharing it with others in a official capacity rather than, just using, web forums and stuff like that, or self-publishing models. This stuff is for everyone who is interested in creative writing. It does not matter what your major is. It doesn't matter what your background is. I probably, had I not become an English major, I probably would have continued writing. And that's just something that's ingrained in me as a person. And I hope to hear from you guys now as we kind of move into Q&A. If any of you are interested in writing and you have questions, and maybe you're not an English major, let me know. And I'll see if I can answer you guys as efficiently and appropriate as possible. So Dr. Indy, do you want to go ahead and move into Q&A?
Sure. Let's see, we stop the screen share. You want to stop your screen share?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry about that.
That's fine.
And I think that there might be some direct messages in the chat too. Make sure that everyone can see.
Yeah, I know. Presently on the chat, let me see if there are questions, but I have 2 hands raised.
Okay.
Let's go with Fallon, then Carrie will come in.
Okay. So I have a question particularly about the publication process. So
Okay.
I know this is most likely rare, but what happens if you submit to multiple publications and they get accepted to maybe like 2 at the same time? Because I know for some publications, they only want that particular work to themselves in that particular journal. So I don't know if you have to like decide which one you really want it for, or do you have to email them? I don't know, I'm curious.
No, this is a great question, and it's happened to me before, but it's very rare, I will say. When you get accepted, generally you don't get 2 acceptances in the same day at the same time. When you get an acceptance, you generally sign a contract too, so you can decline an acceptance. So if that ever happened to you, it wouldn't be that scary. And in fact, it would be unethical for them to accept your work and then publish it without ever talking to you. That would be, don't do that ever. I wouldn't submit to places that, if I'm kind of sniffing around, I wouldn't submit to places that I get the feeling that they would do that. But simultaneous submissions is what that's called. When you submit to multiple journals at once, they usually take so long and they're so sporadic about their response times that it just doesn't really happen. Although there was one occasion where I got 5 rejection letters in one day. That's pretty dreadful. Looking at my phone, it was like looking at a can of rejections, like instead of sardines or something. But it's pretty rare, Fallon. And if they do that, you can just decline one of them. Pick the one that you like the best. I hope that happens for you. I hope you get 2 acceptances once. That'd be great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Fallon, and thanks, Dr. Ashley.
Carrie, I think
Carrie?
Miss Alexander.
Yes.
Yes. We can,
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So my first question is, have you ever self-published? And if so, like, what is your experience with that?
I have that. When I was in high school, I did it. So my experience with this took place in 2007. So this is probably an outdated bit of information here. I will say, if you self-publish, do not put money down on it. Okay. I saved up my money to do it because I didn't know anything about publishing when I was in high school. Obviously, I'd written kind of a long thing. I was like, I want to try to publish this. I worked at a Piggly Wiggly for $5.15 an hour. I'm not trying to be one of those people, but I'm just going to say, like, it took a while to save up my money for that. And it was not worth it because I know nothing about marketing myself. I know nothing about, and I'm glad I didn't, because it's a terrible story that I self-published. And that's why I would try to dissuade you initially from self-publishing, because generally you don't have anyone or enough people usually, unless you're part of a writers group or something like that. You're kind of on your own a lot of times. Hey, good. It's good to see your face. It is, however, good experience. If you just want to come into the publishing world sort of just head first, running, it might be a good experience for you. I think Amazon is free to publish through, but you want to look out for places that are that will charge you a lot of money to do all of that, and then not even attempt to market your work. So that's my experience with it. I paid money for it. It was a few $100s, and then it existed on their website, and then nothing ever happened. So I got ripped off. Don't let that be your experience if you choose to go that route. And also, while we're on the subject of paying for submissions, you're also going to encounter contests. Contests are generally pretty expensive, and I would say avoid contests if they don't come with something like a subscription, with something physical that you can get in the mail. If it's an online journal and they're charging $25 for a contest submission, I wouldn't submit to them. But that's up to you. And that's completely situational. I don't like to tell people what to do with financially when it comes to this kind of stuff. Just be very careful when it comes to money situations.
All right. You still have another question, Carrie? Go ahead.
Yes, I have one more question. So, do you know any resources where you could possibly publish, like if you're into drawing, like comic books?
Actually, go back. Let me go back to Dr. Indy, if you don't mind me screen sharing one more time.
Go do your screen share.
Yeah, it won't take but a moment. Let's see. I'm going to go back to Art Feather. And I'm just going to do Control F and click Art. A lot of literary magazines take art and comics, which is wonderful, and I've always wanted to do it. Are you a comic book illustrator? Or want to be?
I am aspiring, yes.
That's awesome. That is really great. Yeah, a lot of places do take that. Let's see. I don't know if you'll be able to see any of this stuff, but this is one of my magazines that I pulled out. They take illustrations, that kind of stuff. A lot of the ones that publish comic books, or not comic books, but comic sections or chapters or whatever that it is that they're doing, it's all very newish to me. It doesn't really feel like what's published, on the mass market scale. So if you've got something and you feel like you want to send that out, go for it. Thank you for the question. Got a few more in chat too.
Okay, there are questions coming in from on the chat.
They're direct messages. Let me actually stop my share here.
Okay.
Screen.
All right.
And
Valeria Jackson, do you want to ask your question directly, Valeria, or you want me to read it?
Well, I can just say my question.
Okay.
I just said, like, how are you able to determine which publication you're going to submit to, besides looking at like how much they cost?
That's a good question too. Again, there's no easy answer for that, because really it takes just a bit of experience with them. I mean, obviously start with, do they publish fiction? Do they publish poetry? That kind of thing. You just have to open them up and see if you like what they publish. If they're publishing stories that kind of exist beyond your experience, or maybe you're just not that interested in the style of the magazine, I would determine it by that. And this is an interesting question too, because a lot of magazines just change up their aesthetic so often. Like Plowshares, for instance, this issue that I have here was edited by Major Jackson. He has his own stylistic preferences, and he's going to select stories and poems for this issue that falls within the realm of his experience. I think every journal is going to be somewhat similar to that. So it could just come down to, do I like the progression of the magazine, or how long have they been around? Do I want a readership that's a bit bigger, or do I want to start small? But it really just takes some digging, Valeria. Thank you for the question.
And I see Dr. Whittington has a question for you, Dr. Ashley. So Dr. Whittington, you want to come on and ask your question?
So what about if you want to publish maybe photography, just general stills, nature, maybe even travel, and also artwork?
The same exact thing as comics and illustrations. A lot of them take photography. I have Red Rock Review here in front of me. I love the artwork on this magazine, and it's a print magazine. I can't show it to you online, but they don't publish the art inside the journal. This is just as one example, but they will take it because they need cover illustrations, and you just have to look and see what they're looking for there. Sometimes they'll be like, well, they don't want you to submit to us directly. They'll just want your DeviantArt page or something like that, and you can give them multiple options. But in my experience, there are some places that you just, you upload a PDF of your photography, maybe they'll take it. Do you take, did you say you take nature photographs?
Yeah, I do nature, I do product photos, I do portraits, a bunch of everything.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that you should try it for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let me know when you do too. You can send me an email and let me know when what you're able to do. I'd love to hear back from you. And that goes for everyone else too. I'd love to hear back from, I just want to hear that you guys are, doing this. It would make me happy just to know that you're trying. So.
All right, let's continue. You have a good number of questions. Questions are coming, and I'm very excited. So Chastity, please, can you come on and ask your question?
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I was wondering, through submission, is there a form of copyright that you receive for your original work?
Oh boy, this question is a popular one, and I'm glad you asked it. How do I copyright my work? Please don't worry about that. When you write something and you email it to yourself, it's copyrighted. The moment you create a file and you save it and then you have it on your computer, you're safe. I promise. This has never been an issue for me, and I've been doing this for, like I said, a little over 15 years. You can go through the trouble of getting like an official copyright. I honestly can't even tell you how to do that because I've never had to do it before. Used to, you would go to the post office and mail yourself the thing to prove that this is something that existed in your hands before, but no, generally this is just with the moment you create the document and save it to your computer, it's yours. You can prove that it's yours with no problem. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you.
It can be scary. I know no one wants to have their stuff stolen. Okay, we all worry about that as artists, and rightfully so. But I want to tell you that there's nothing to worry about. You might not listen to me initially, but I promise you're fine.
All right. Dr. Esunga mentions that you did, there is a message there for everyone, that you did mention you had advice for non-English majors who wanted to publish, and she is a non-English major who would like to publish creative writing. What advice would you give Dr. Esunga?
I think that my advice would just be,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, my advice would just be to read as much as you can. And that for the English majors in the room right now, that might sound very obvious, but you know, I didn't hear that until way after I started writing. That I need to be reading as much as possible, and I hope that you are a big reader already. If you're not, if you don't have time to, try to devote a little bit of time to just, you know, every week, you know, an hour or two every week to looking through some of these journals that, you know, exist on these resources. And I need to put that in the chat too, so you guys can actually have those links. So don't let me forget to do that before I go. But be looking at these places, be reading as much as you can to learn what people are doing in a contemporary setting. And I'm saying that from experience. When I was just starting off, I knew very little outside of the stuff that I learned in high school. And we only read older stuff, okay? And when you're reading older stuff and you're trying to write, your writing is gonna emulate a lot of, you know, that classic literature that is really not the way that people write anymore. And I'm not trying to sound like pretentious when I say that. I mean, it's just like literally something that we kind of have to make habit of. If you enjoy reading classic literature, try to change up your reading habits too. And also read a diverse list of things. Don't just read, you know, fiction if you're interested in writing fiction. You know, read poetry too, read nonfiction. Read articles outside of your field. May I ask what your major is or what your field is?
Dr. Esong,
Business.
yeah.
Business. Oh,
I'm
wow.
in a business field. Mhm.
That's really great to hear, by the way. And honestly, I'm sure that you could probably talk for quite a while too about your experience as a creative writer, you know, existing in the business field. Do you write fiction, poetry, nonfiction? What are you interested in?
As a student, I wrote what they asked me to write. But as a business professor, I write about business topics. So I have, that's why I don't even know how to start doing this, but I'm in love with what you guys do, you know. That's just not what we do in the business world. So
Yeah. It, like I said, if it becomes just like a minor hobby too, like if it's something that you guys are just interested in, I think part of the component of, you know, the most important component to being a writer is reading a lot. And that's the too long didn't read version of what of my initial answer. It's just read as much as you can outside of your own field. Learn about the world, learn what you have to say about the world. And once you've learned, I'm sorry, you were cutting out there for a moment.
Go ahead, Dr. Ashley.
But that's all I wanted to say is you just have to connect yourself with the world, read outside of your field. The more you read, I think the more you have to say. So that's my advice.
thank you.
All right, Fallon has an advice to complement what you told
good.
about copyright. So Fallon, you go ahead and tell us about the copyright thing you posted on.
Dr. Ndi.
Yes, Dr. Diabate.
I have a question.
All right, just 1 second. After Fallon's response, you ask your question.
The question is for somebody like me in economics and entrepreneurship area here.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes when you write academic paper, nobody cares. And I want to just to break it down to people we serve as farmers or limited resource farmers, or anybody can just glance at one-page document and how to do that. Sometimes I feel like I'm I don't want to talk to my audience, the economics people. I want to talk to common sense people.
Mm.
How do you put in one page, especially all this crazy methodology here, there, up and down? I don't want to do that. I want to just say, this is something when you're sitting in the doctor's office, you can just read it and get it. So that's what I'm talking about.
Let me ask you this. And I'm sorry, there's a siren going off outside my window. I hope that didn't just startle anyone. But when you are talking to a friend about the work that you're doing, what is the difference between writing an abstract and the way that you describe your work to a friend that might not know very much about what you do? I'm sure the answer is somewhere in that. I'm not really sure, though, in terms of how to make general audiences care about what you're doing. That's a really interesting question.
Because I seen it somewhere when I want to read something if it's short and just go through it to one point or two. Yes, I want to read it. But when it comes to long academic paper that doesn't, sometimes myself, it doesn't make sense to me. It's too long and we're talking to a restricted audience, and I wanted to open to anybody who can really make sense out of it.
All right. Dr. Ashley, with your permission, I'll jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Dr. Diabate.
Yes, sir.
With writing.
Okay.
This is what you want to do.
Okay.
When you are writing, you first of all understand the audience to which you are writing.
Okay.
It's an academic audience. You can use all the jargon, the terminology in agriculture that only agri-engineers and agri-entrepreneurs like you would understand. But if you are explaining this, because you have to gauge the level of knowledge of your audience. If their level of knowledge is not that much and not that sophisticated, you have to break it down to their level. And just take it this way. Anything you can explain in any complex language, be sure that you can simplify it to the understanding of a third grader. My students who are on the call, they would remember I always joke when I ask them questions in class. I'll tell them, explain this to your baby brother who is just in the third grade. I am your baby brother. I don't understand what you're saying. Say it simply. If you can do that, like we're talking of academic writing, a dissertation might be 500 pages, but the abstract for the dissertation is just 1 page. And that 1 page could be told in academic language or in the layman's language. It would be for you, after understanding and studying your audience, to make sure your audience get exactly what you want them to get.
Okay.
That answered your question.
That one, now that helped a lot. I understand what you thought we say. But I'm glad I am here to listen to you guys, so I can just leave my little closet and come to the big audience.
Now, next time I'll have you tell us how you've gone about the next big research paper you're doing. Come and explain to us. We are lay people. We'll be our first audience. We'll tell you whether we understood or not. And then to simplify it further.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we have 1 or 2 comments before I release you guys to go. Fallon, you wanted to compliment Dr. Ashley's comment on copyright. You want to go ahead and say that?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I could input Well, I mostly copyrighted like screenplays, but if you must copyright, then the best protection is through the United States Copyright Office, because it ensures all levels of safety and it's forever. If you copyright with the WGA, and for those that don't know, that's the Writers Guild of the West, and of course they have one of the East. That one has a couple less protections, and it only lasts up to 5 years. So if you copyright with WGA, you would have to copyright again, but the US Copyright Office is forever.
Okay, thank you.
Why on earth would the copyright be temporary? That's strange. That's really interesting. I'll have to look into that.
I have no clue, but yeah, it's 5 years. I just realized that because I copyrighted with WGA. So after 5 years, I would have to probably copyright again.
Yeah. Thank you, Fallon.
All right. Dr. Isunga, I see you have a comment. It was just in support of what Dr. Diabate was saying, or do you have something else to add?
I think coming from a different major, I kind of echo the comments that he made, because those papers that we write for the academic audience, definitely that's not what someone will call creative writing. Yeah. So for us, it's always a great learning opportunity, a way for us to think differently. So I was really just echoing his sentiments. That's all.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I see we don't have any more questions, and we've been in the call for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. I think at this time, I would call on those in the audience to give Dr. Ashley a big round of applause. You could use your reaction button there, all right? And give him a big round of applause. And I thank you guys for coming. And those of you who are on the call, my dear colleagues, if you have any topic you want to share with the university community, which could be of interest, please do not hesitate to reach out to the interdisciplinary seminar series. We have another series coming on Tuesday morning at 11, talking about the Tuskegee Airmen oral history. This is history they told themselves that were documented, and our students will be retelling those stories, bringing them back to life. So please join us, and remember to come and share your research and your activities with us. I give you thanks. You have a blessed and wonderful one.
Thank you. And for those of you who needed, I just put in the links.
Thank you.
For new pages and heavy feather reviews, where to submit resources. You can grab those if you want.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all so much. I appreciated it.
Okay.
Thank you.